Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Daled, Daf 74 of Masechta Yoma. Daf Ayin Daled. So for the first Amud, we continue with the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish that we began at the end of the day yesterday. The argument about Hatzi shiur, asur min hatorah. When you have something, if you do something that you're not allowed to do, but you do less than the amount, the minimum amount. So is that asur midoraisa, even if the punishment may not apply, is it nonetheless asur midoraisa to do? We saw machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. We're going to continue with that for the first Amud, and then we discuss the concept of Eenuiy, of afflicting oneself on Yom Kippur, where that's learned from. Let's begin. We're on Daf Ayin Gimel Amud Beis 2, 4, 5 lines from the bottom. Wow. Jumping right into things over here. So, we had seen a machlokas at the end of the day yesterday between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Right? Well, and it's based on our Mishnah, right? We started the final parak of Masechta Yoma, and the Mishnah says that there are 5 things that are asur on Yom Kippur. And then the Gemara asks, what do you mean that it's asur? It's not just asur, you chayiv karis. That's like a much bigger deal than simply asur. So to which we said, well, it's talking about if you do less than the amount. So for example, in order to be chayiv karis for eating on Yom Kippur, you have to eat a kikoseves hagasa. You have to eat the size of a large date. Now, what the Gemara wants to say is that, well, if you eat less than a large date, while you might not be chayiv karis, it's nonetheless asur. So then the Gemara says, well, that makes sense if you hold that it is in fact asur. Like Rabbi Yochanan, who says that Hatzi shiur, asur min hatorah, that when you have less than a shiur, it's nonetheless asur midoraisa. Rish Lakish, however, says that Hatzi shiur is mutar min hatorah. Well, at least it's not asur min hatorah. And therefore the Gemara asked, well, then according to Rish Lakish, that if Hatzi shiur is not asur min hatorah, well then, what is the Mishnah saying is asur? Right? I guess if we want to, meaning for now, the assumption is that Rish Lakish holds that Hatzi shiur is mutar min hatorah. That it's, as long as you do. So, for example, to eat less than a large date on Yom Kippur is completely permitted. So if that's the case, then what is the Mishnah, what's it talking about when it says asur? It should say chayiv karis, and talking about a regular shiur. So, the Gemara wanted to say what it means is that Rish Lakish says that midoraisa, it's asur. That midoraisa it's mutar. That according to Rish Lakish, midoraisa Hatzi shiur is mutar, but it's also midorabanan. And therefore, when the Mishnah says that these things are asur, and we say it's talking about less than a shiur, it's talking about asur midorabanan. So if you eat a proper amount, if you eat the amount of a large date, so you be chayiv karis. If you eat less than a large date, then it's asur midorabanan, but midoraisa it's mutar. Fine. Now, the Gemara is asking a kasha in Rish Lakish. How could it be that Rish Lakish says, how could it be that our argument is correct, that according to Rish Lakish, Hatzi shiur is mutar min hatorah, but also midorabanan? If a fellow swears, right, makes a swear, he says, so in this case, what we're talking about is he swears, I'm not going to eat nevela or something. So, and then he eats nevela. So that's what's called a shvuas bitoy. Shvuas bitoy says, I'm going to, I swear that I'm going to do something or I'm not going to do something. That's a shvuas bitoy, an expression. You say I'm going to do something or not. Now, if you violate that swear, so you have to bring a korban. Now, there is a halacha, however, that if you make a swear la'asos, right? What's it called? La'asos, right? La'asos mitzvah v'lo kiyem. Is that what it was? Nishba l'kayim is a mitzvah v'lo kiyem potter. That if a fellow swears to be mekayim a mitzvah and wasn't mekayim the mitzvah, potter from a shvuas bitoy. Right? That when it comes to mitzvahs specifically, if you swear to do a mitzvah and you violate that, you don't bring a korban shvuas bitoy. And now, here's the shaila. That if we say that Hatzi shiur is asur midorabanan according to Rish Lakish, well, if it's asur, then that means that it's basically a mitzvah. Okay, it's not just a random thing. It's something. It's a halacha, right? That you're not allowed to eat something that's less than the amount, than the required amount, right? Midra Abanon, according to Rish Lakish, you're not allowed to eat it. So now, if that's the case, then that means that it's a proper halacha. In which case, if you swear then, if you make a swear, I'm going to stay away from eating even less than a shiur, and then you end up eating it. So for example, nevela, if you have a dead animal that wasn't slaughtered, so you're not allowed to eat it, you're not allowed to eat a kazayis of it. What if you say, I'm making a shavua, I'm going to swear, I'm even going to stay away from less than a kazayis of nevela. And then you end up eating a kazayis of nevela. So now, if we're saying that according to Rish Lakish, well, even eating less than a kazayis of nevela is nonetheless asur, albeit midra abanon, well then that makes it kilu a mitzvah, a halacha. And if we say that if you make a swear, l'kayim es a mitzvah v'lokiyim, if you swear, in the context of a mitzvah, and then, you violate your swear, you're pater from bringing a korban. So if that's the case, then if a fellow swears that he's going to stay away even from less than a kazayis of nevela, and then he ends up eating less than a kazayis of nevela, so he violated essentially a mitzvah, in which case he should be pater from bringing a korban shavuos bitoy. Yeah, we're going to see in a minute that Rish Lakish seems told that he would be chayiv a korban shavuos bitoy. Now, if he says though that less than a shiur is nonetheless asur midrabanan, that makes it a mitzvah shitaka be pater from bringing a shavuos bitoy. You hear that? A korban shavuos bitoy. So Frekti Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom of Ein Gimel Amud Beis, Yihachi lo nichayev ole korban shavua. Well, if what we're saying is correct, that according to Rish Lakish, even though midar oraisa Hatzi shiur is mutter, but midar abanon it's asur, well then that makes it a mitzvah, right? Meaning even less than a shiur, it's a mitzvah to avoid it. And therefore, if somebody makes a shvua that he's going to refrain from eating even less than a shiur of something, like nevela, so and then he ends up violating that shvua, he should be pater from a korban shavuos bitoy, since it's in the context of a mitzvah. Aloma Tanan, but why do we have a Mishnah that says shvua shlo ochal v'achal nevelis u'treif v'shkasim u'rmasim chayev Reb Shimon poter? That if a fellow makes a shvua, he makes a swear that he's going to refrain from eating nevelis, treifis, right, animals that would die within 12 months. You're not allowed to eat them. Shkatzim or masim, different buggy kind of things. Chayev. So according to the Tanakhama, Yitaka chayev a korban shavuos bitoy. Reb Shimon poter. Reb Shimon says that Yitaka poter. V'avinam bam. We ask, Amai chayev mush b'vomed me'asinayu. And the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Why should you be chayev to bring a korban shavuos bitoy when it comes to nevela, treifa, shkatzim or masim? Meaning, we're assuming for now, for the time being, we're assuming that, right, we didn't say anything yet about Hatzi shiur in this Mishnah. And therefore, at this point, the Gemara wants to know, why should you be chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy if you say, I'm going to stay away from eating nevela, and then you eat nevela? Why should you be chayiv a korban shavuos bitoy? It's a mitzvah. I thought we said, nishbel l'kayim is a mitzvah v'lo kiyim, he's pater. And nevela, sheifish, shkatzim, or masim, these are all mitzvahs. The Torah says, don't eat them. So if a person makes a shvua that he's going to refrain from eating these things, that it's a mitzvah already not to eat them, and he says, that's what I'm not going to eat these things, and he ends up eating them, of course he's pater from bringing a korban shavuos bitoy. It's a mitzvah. But why does the Mishnah say chayev? So Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan the Amri b'kol advarim hamutarim v'advarim asurim. So Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan say, well, it's talking about a situation where it wasn't only, let's say, nevela. It was also shchuta over there. Kilu, there were some things that were permitted, some things that were forbidden. They were all kind of lumped together. And therefore, on account of the things that were permitted to eat, that's why he's going to have to bring a korban shavuos bitoy, because that was not a mitzvah for the chulin. And once already he's bringing a korban shavuos bitoy for the chulin that he said he's not going to eat, chveisnish hamburgers, and he ended up eating it. So he brings a korban shavuos bitoy for that, and then he also brings it also for the, while already he's bringing it for the permitted things that he swore about, so and he also is going to be bringing it for the nevela. Fine. Now, Rish Lakish Amar, and says Rish Lakish, Yata Motze ele b'mefarish Hatzi shiur v'aliba d'Rabbanan or b'stam v'aliba d'Rabakiva. The Amar Adam Oser Atzma b'choshu. What's Rish Lakish's taich? Well, how does Rish Lakish answer the question? Remember, what's the question? And the question is that the Mishnah says that if a fellow says, I'm going to refrain from eating, let's say, nevela, and he eats nevela, the Tanna Kama says that he's chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy. And we want to know, why is he chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy? It's a mitzvah. The Torah says, don't eat nevela. And we know that nishba l'kaim is a mitzvah v'lokim. He's potter for bringing a korban shavuos bitoy. So why does the Mishnah say that he's chayiv? So Rish Lakish wants to say, well, it's because he swore that he's going to eat, right, that he's going to refrain from eating a Hatzi shiur. Less than a kazayis, less than the amount. And because it's less than the amount, it's not a mitzvah. Because the mitzvah is to refrain from eating a shiur, a kazayis of nevela. That's what's not allowed. But he says that I'm going to refrain from eating less than a kazayis, even less than a kazayis, right? And that is not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is a kazayis. He says, I'm even going to take upon myself to stay away from less than a kazayis. Now that's not a mitzvah. And because it's not a mitzvah, if he violates that, he's going to be chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy. So we see that apparently less than a shiur, according to Rish Lakish, is not even asur midrabanan. Because if it was asur midrabanan, he should be potter from bringing a korban shavuos bitoy, because that makes it a mitzvah. And if it's a mitzvah, then he's potter, right? Nishba l'kaim is a mitzvah v'lokim potter. So from the fact that Rish Lakish says that by this Mishnah in Nevela, we're talking about where he swears that he's going to stay away from eating even less than a kizayis, and if he violates that, he's going to be chayiv a korban shavuos bitoy. That must mean that Hatzi shiur, less than an amount, is completely mutter, and it's not asur in any way, because if it was asur midrabanan even, so then he would be potter from a korban shavuos bitoy, right? So again, Rish Lakish says, Rish Lakish yata motze, this Mishnah is talking about when he says that I'm going to refrain from eating nevela, and he ends up eating nevela, we say it's chayiv a korban shavuos bitoy. That's talking about b'mefarish Hatzi shiur v'aliba d'Rabbanan. So according to the rabbis who say that when a person makes a swear stam, if a person says, I'm not going to eat nevela, for example, so that means, by default, he's not going to eat a shiur of nevela, a kazayis of nevela. However, if he specifies that, no, I'm going to stay away from eating even a Hatzi shiur, so then meaning the Chacham would say that the default would be a regular shiur, so he would have to specify that what he means is that I'm going to stay away from eating a less than a shiur, and we're saying that if he ends up eating less than a shiur, so he's chayiv a korban shavuos, v'aliba d'Rabbanan, or, right, it's fine, o b'stam, v'aliba d'Rabakiva d'Amar ad moser atzmo b'choshu, or even if he just says, I'm not going to eat nevela, full stop, he doesn't specify an amount, according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that, well, by default, then he's talking about any amount, which of course is less than a shiur. Fine. So, again, we are saying that according to Rish Lakish, the reason why he is potter from bringing the reason why he's chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy is because because we're talking about less than an amount, less than a shiur, and there you have it, that according to Rish Lakish, less than a shiur is completely mutter. It's not asur midrabanan at all, which is a kasha on what we had said at the end of the day yesterday, which is that our Mishnah, when it says that these Eenuiy of Yom Kippur are asur, it's talking about less than a shiur, and according to Rish Lakish, it means that it's asur midrabanan. We see from here that it must be mutter midrabanan, which is why you're going to be chayiv a korban shavuos bitoy. And if you're going to want to suggest, well, Kevin the Isle heter min hatorah kochayil korban shavuos, and then the Gemara says, well, I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking that einochinami, I could still say that according to Rish Lakish, Hatzi shiur is mutter min hatorah but asur midrabanan. Well, then if it's asur midrabanan, well, then why are you chayiv to bring a korban shavuos bitoy? Because since mida oraisa, it's mutter Hatzi shiur, so therefore you're going to be chayiv to bring a korban shvuas bitoy, since midoraisa it's mutter. Midorabanan it's asur, yeah. But since midoraisa it's mutter, you're going to be chayev to bring a korban shvuas bitoy. Ve'atnan, but we learn in the Mishnah, shvuas ha'edus. When it comes to shvuas ha'edus, who can tell me what shvuas ha'edus is? Shvuas ha'edus, if I'm not mistaken, is that when a fellow knows testimony about somebody else, and he swears that he doesn't, because he wants to stay out of it. For whatever reason, he doesn't want to give a testimony. He swears that he doesn't know any testimony. In Noheges, right? So he's chayiv to bring and it's not true because he does know the testimony. So he's chayiv to bring a korban. In Noheges, ela beru'uyin laha'id. I think, I believe he's chayiv to bring a korban. Yeah, korban shvua. Yeah. So in Noheges, ela beru'uyin laha'id. So shvuas ha'edus, this thing about bringing a korban when you know testimony and you don't give it. So in Eenuiy of Yom Kippur, it's specifically for people who are able to give testimony. You have to be somebody who's fit to give testimony in order to be chayav a korban shvuah if you don't give testimony. But we ask the kashan mutei mai, to exclude what? What's an example of somebody who's unable to give testimony, who's part from a shvuas ha'edus? Rav Papa amar lemutei melech. Rav Papa says it's the exclusion of a king. Rav Yaakov amar lemutei misachi b'kubya. Rav Yaakov says it excludes a gambler, because a gambler, of course, is unable to give testimony. So therefore, we're saying that since a gambler cannot give testimony, so he's also part of Shavuos Ha'edus. You hear that? Misachik b'kuvya is only, right, a gambler. Why is he forbidden from giving testimony? Midrabanan, the rabbi said, look, we have different reasons, maybe because he's not baki b'yeshua shel olam, whatever it is. The rabbi said we don't want gamblers giving testimony. Now, midoraisa, a gambler is fit to give testimony, but the rabbi say don't give testimony. So we see that it's also midrabanan for a gambler to give testimony, and we're saying that that's enough to say that he'd be potter from a korban shvuah. So we see that when something is also midrabanan, you would be potter from a shvuah. So therefore, going back to Rish Lakish, if Rish Lakish in fact holds that Hatzi shiur is also midrabanan, then he should be potter from a korban shvuah's bitoy. And yet, Rish Lakish is saying that by Hatzi shiur, he'd be chayva korban shvuah's bitoy, which means that it must be that Hatzi shiur is mutter even midrabanan. Shani Asum Damarkra im lo yagid faila baragadahu klal. Period. To which the Gemara says, no, don't bring me a kasha from the gamblers being unable to give testimony and therefore they're potter from a korban shvuah, because korban shvuah doesn't have to do with mutter asur. Meaning, when we had said nishba l'kaim samitzvah v'lokiyeh potter from a korban shvuah's bitoy, so that's specifically by a korban shvuah's bitoy. It has to be, if it's a mitzvah, you're potter. When it comes to korban shvuah, when a person knows testimony doesn't give it, well, there it says im lo yagid, that in order to be chayav a korban shvuah, it has to be somebody who, well, if you don't give testimony, well, then you're going to be chayav a korban shvuah. If you knew testimony, you didn't give it. But somebody who's unable to give testimony in the first place, like a gambler, so therefore he's going to be potter from a korban shvuah. But it has nothing to do with, whether it's asur midoraisa or midorabanan. No, it has to do with, is this a person who's able to give testimony? If the answer is yes, well then by not giving testimony, he'll be chayav a korban shvuah. If he's unable to give testimony, then he'll be part of a korban shvuah. However, when it comes to shvuah's bitur, the korban shvuah's bitur, that's about is the thing that was sworn about asur or mutter. And there we're talking about midoraisa. And Rish Lakish would say that if you swear by Hatzi shiur, which is mutter midoraisa, you can be chayav a korban even if it is asur midorabanan. So now, frak Gemara. 1 second. V'cholecha detani anushkaris lo tani asur. 1 second. our whole premise in the Gemara, how we, got to this complicated stuff with Shavuos, was based on the fact, what was the initial kasha in the Gemara? The initial kasha in the Gemara is, how could the Mishnah say simply that these Eenuiim on Yom Kippur are asur, if in fact they're not just asur, they're chayiv kares? Meaning that if these are things that you're chayiv kares for, asur is not the right descriptor. Chayiv kares is the correct descriptor. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. Is that really true? That when you have a situation of chayiv kares, it won't be described as simply asur? V'atane, we learn in the Brisa, afal pishe amru asur, b'chulan lo amru anush kares ela al. No, afal pishe amru asur b'chulan. So even though they said asur by all of them, so we see that it says asur, we're applying the word asur to all of the Eenuiim, but nonetheless, lo amru anush kares ela la ocha v'shose v'ose melacha b'vad. However, the chiyuv kares is specifically for eating and drinking and doing malacha on Yom Kippur. So we have a brisa here which says initially in the Reisha that it says asur by all of them. Yet the only things that are chayiv kares are achila v'shtia and asiyas malacha. So we see that we're using the word asur as a descriptor for all of the Eenuiim, even the ones that are chayiv kares. So we see that taka, you can use asur as a descriptor for kares. Hachi kamar. The Gemara says, no, you have to read into the brisa a little more and explain it in the following way. Kisha amru asur lo amru ela b'kachatzi shiur. Aha. That when the Mishnah says asur, or the brisa says asur, or when they in general, when the halacha is that these 5 Eenuiim on Yom Kippur are asur, it means asur when it's less than the shiur, less than the required amount. It's asur, i.e. asur midrabanan. Or, well, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it would be midoraisa. According to Rish Lakish, it would be midrabanan. But meaning, we're not talking about chayiv kares because we're talking about less than a shiur. Aval kishir anus kares. But if you have the required amount, so you'll be chayiv kares. V'afal pisha anush kares. And even though we say that if you have the required minimum amount, you'll be chayiv kares, in anush kares ela ochel v'shose v'ose melacha b'vad, the chiyuv kares only applies to eating and drinking and doing melacha, period. So we see that in fact, asur is talking about less than a shiur, but the chiyuv kares were specific about which things were chayiv kares for. V'bai say more if you want, I will say ki katani asur ashayra. Or you can answer that in our Mishnah, when it says asur, it's not talking about achila v'shtiya, because we're saying that only achila v'shtiya is actually chayiv kares. So when the Mishnah says that all of these things are asur, it's talking about the other things, right? Rechitza, sicha, nila sasano, tashim shamita. The Tanu Rav of Rav Yosef b'shar sifra devei Rav. The Rav and Rav Yosef taught b'shar sifra devei Rav. Rashi says it's talking about on the Medrash Halacha of Bamidbar and Devarim. Minayin liyom HaKippurim she'asur b'rechitza v'sicha v'nila sasando v'tashim shamita tamilom v'shabos and Shavuos. That how do we know that Yom Kippur is asur? And when it says asur, what's it talking about? Bathing, putting on oil, leather shoes, sexual intercourse. But it leaves out achila v'shtiya and asayas melacha. Kilu. So here's a proof that we see that we're saying asur specifically in the context of the things that don't have a chiyuv kares associated with them. Tamilom Shabbos and Shavuos, that just like when it comes to Shabbos, we have these dinim derabanan, Shavuos, Shabbosom, from which we learn out that there are also Shavuoses. So the same thing on Yom Kippur. There are certain things that are asur midoraisa and that you chayiv kares for, but then there are other things that are asur midarabanan, and that is rechitza, sicha, ninasasana, tashma shamita, these other things. But those things are not chayiv kares. Says the Gemara Gufa, Hatzi shiur Rabbi Yochanan amar asur min hatorah, Rish Lakish amar mutar min hatorah. So going back to our machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about when you have less than amount, Right? So if you have a certain amount that's asur, and then you do less than the amount, so Rabbi Yochanan says that it's nonetheless asur midoraisa. You won't get the punishment per se, but to do it is nonetheless asur midoraisa. So for example, taking achila v'shtei on Yom Kippur, for example, eating and drinking on Yom Kippur. So kikosevas agasa, you're going to be chayiv kares. But less than that, what if you have less than a kikosevas agasa? Says Rabbi Yochanan, it's nonetheless asur midoraisa. You're not going to be chayiv kares, but it's asur midoraisa. Says Rish Lakish, it's takamuter midoraisa. Rabbi Yochanan Amar asur min hatorah came the chazil itztufe yisura ka'achil. Rabbi Yochanan says that less than an amount is asur midoraisa because even though you happen to be eating a quantity which doesn't qualify for chiyuv kares, but it's the same food that if you would just eat more of it, you would be chayiv kares. Kilu, I don't know, what are you eating? Eating a piece of an apple, right? So you eat like a tiny little bite of an apple. Well, if you would eat just a little bit more of that, you'd be chayiv kares. So even when you just have not enough, it's still asur. You just haven't gotten to the level where you can be chayiv kares, but it's asur nonetheless. Rish Lakish Amar, where it says Rish Lakish muter min hatorah, that you'd be allowed midoraisa to eat less than an amount, because achila amar rachmana v'leka, because the Torah says to eat, and it's not considered eating if it's less than a shiur, and therefore it's going to be muter midoraisa. Eis v'Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan has a kasha to Rish Lakish. Eini ela kol sheyeshna ba'onesh yeshna ba'asura. We have a brisa that says that all I know is that an amount that you're going to be chayiv the punishment for, that amount you're also warned against eating. Where am I? Koi v'chatzi shiur o v'eino ba'onesh yachol eino ba'asura. So this is in the context of eating chaleb, of eating forbidden fats. So the brisa is saying, all I know, right, you're not allowed to eat a kazayis of chaleb. So all I know is that, okay, you're not allowed to eat a kazayis of chaleb. If you eat a kazayis of chaleb, I believe you're chayiv kares. So, yeah, so it's chayiv kares. If you eat a kazayis of chaleb, so you're chayiv kares. So says the brisa, all I know is that if I eat a kazayis of chaleb, I'm chayiv kares, and therefore the isur only applies to a kazayis. I.e., I might think that if I eat less than a kazayis, there's nothing wrong with that. Right again. All I know is that the amount that you're going to be chayiv kares for is the amount that you're not allowed to do. But what about this animal that's called a koi? Or what about if I eat, right, which isn't, the isur of chalev applies specifically to behemoths, not to chayas, to domesticated animals like a sheep, a goat, so a cow. So this koi, it's not exactly clear if it's a behemoth or a chaya. So how do I know that I'm even not allowed to eat the chalev of a koi? How do I know that I'm even not allowed to eat less than a kazayas of chalev? Tamulomer kol chalev, all chalev. So Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore that even includes a koi and a less than a kazayas. So Rabbi Yochanan says, look, Rish Lakish, you see, there's a brisa that's saying that even less than a kazayas of chalev is going to be asur mida oraisa, because it says kol chalev, to include all chalev, even less than a kazayas. So we see, Rish Lakish, that Hatzi shiur is taka asur mida oraisa. And for Rish Lakish, midu abanim v'kras machta ba'ama. Says Rish Lakish, no. Midu abanim. Less than a shiur is asur, only midu abanim. What do you do with this pasuk? It's an asmachta. It's asur midu abanim. We're finding a pasuk to which we can base it on, but it's not saying that the Torah says that less than a kazayas is asur midu oraisa. Not true. Less than a kazayas is mutar midu oraisa, only asur midu abanim. That pasuk, it's an asmachta for a din d'rabanan, but it's not a din d'oraisa. Hachinam mistav and ataka makes sense to say that this brisa is talking about things that are also midrabanan. Disakadaitich d'oraisa, because if we're saying that we're not sure if the koi, right? If we're not sure that this brisa is saying that I don't know what the deal is with the koi or with this chatzi shiur. Well, therefore we have this pasuk to say kol to include even a koi and a chatzi shiur. And if we say that that's talking about midoraisa, koi sveiko, it's the kra leisuye sveika. Meaning the whole point of this brisa is we have this koi which we don't know what it is. And we also have Hatzi shiur that we don't know if it's asur or mutter. And therefore we say, well, we have this pasuk of kol chaylev to include even these things that we're not sure about. Well, Hashem doesn't know if a koi is a chaya or behema, and therefore the Torah is saying, look, I don't know if a koi is a chaya or behema, so therefore even kol is to include a koi. What do you mean? The Torah would know if it's a chaya or behema. What, Hashem doesn't know if it's a chaya or behema? It must be that we're talking about midrabanan. We don't know if a koi is a chaya or behema, so we say, look, don't eat its chaylev. And we find an asmachta from the pasuk of kol chaylev, but we are the ones who don't know if a koi is a chaya or a behema. We are besafik about it. And therefore we say, don't eat it out of safik. And this pasuk is just an asmachta. But if it was mida oraisa, the Torah would just tell you, don't eat the chaylev of a koi. Not to say that we need to include it because we don't know. But the Torah would know. It would tell you what to do. The point is that we don't know. And we're being machmir not to eat the chaylev of a koi. And we base it on this pasuk. But the fact of the matter is, it's midrabanan. And if the koi is midrabanan, so then the Hatzi shiur, that's in the same brisa, is also talking about midrabanan. So imishum ha lo irya, right? Exactly. Meaning I don't need a pasuk, right? Mida oraisa, we wouldn't have to teach us that the koi is asur misafik. It would just tell us if the koi is asur or mutter. We are besafik, so therefore we need therefore we have to say that don't eat the chaylev of a koi. So kasavi, rather, koi birya b'fnei atzmahi. Oh, sorry, my mistake. Let me read those last few words again. I'm sorry. Imishum ha lo irya. So Rabbi Yochanan answers Rish Lakish, and he says, no, Rish Lakish, that is not approved to teach that we're talking about Hatzi shiur, that this brisa is dafka talking about midrabanan, because Rish Lakish said, Rabbi Yochanan is saying, no, this brisa is not talking about a suffix. Rabbi Yochanan says, we're not saying that this brisa is saying that we don't know if a koi is a behema or a chaya. Rabbi Yochanan says what the brisa is saying is that kasavre birya koi birya b'fnei atzmai, that a koi, this animal, we don't know, it's its own birya, it's its own creature. It's neither a behema, it's neither a chai, it's its own thing. And that is why I need a pasuk mida oraisa, says Rabbi Yochanan, to teach me that not just behemas there's an isur eating their chaylev, but even this koi, which is its own kind of thing. So again, so where Rish Lakish wants to say that koi, we don't know if it's a suffix, whether it's a behema or a chaya, and we're the ones who don't know what it is, and therefore we say, look, don't eat it, it's chaylev out of suffix, and it's an asmachta to base it on a pasuk, but we're talking about dafka midrabanan, and therefore Hatzi shiur is only also midrabanan. Says Rabbi Yochanan, not true. A koi, it's not a suffix behema or chaya. A koi is its own category, it's its own thing, and we do need a pasuk to teach us that the isur of chaylev applies even to koi, which is in its own category. And guess what, says Rabbi Yochanan? This pasuk is also teaching us that Hatzi shiur is also midoraisa. Dilotema achi, because if you don't say this, Hadam Ravidi Baravin, that which Ravidi Baravin says, Av kol asuye koi, that when the pasuk says that kol is to include a koi sveko isur kol abuye sveka. If a koi is a suffix, what? I need a pasuk to include a suffix. The pasuk would just tell me straight up if it's right mutter or asur. Elabirya shiny, hachanami birya shiny. Rather, it must be that koi is its own species, and the Torah is telling us that the isur applies even to koi, not out of suffix, but it actually is an isur midoraisa according to Rabbi Yochanan. And the same would apply to Hatzi shiur. It would be also min hatorah according to Rabbi Yochanan. Taner Rabbanon, the rabbis taught ta'anus nafsho seichem. So the pasuk says, in the context of Yom Kippur, you have to te'anu, you have to make yourself uncomfortable, afflict yourselves. Yachol yeshiv b'chamo b'tzino kadeshi yitzdayer. Okay, if that's the case, so then should I go out of my way in order to be uncomfortable? Should I find, a very sunny place and to hydrate myself in the sun? Should I find a very cold place and freeze myself so that I'll be uncomfortable? Talmud Lomar v'chol malacha lo taisu. Well, it also says in the context of Yom Kippur, don't do any malacha. Ma malacha sheval taise, afinu nefesh sheval taise. Well, just like when it comes to malachas are things that you refrain from doing. So also when it comes to afflicting yourself on Yom Kippur, it's things that you refrain from doing. Refrain from eating, refrain from drinking. Don't go out of your way to sit in the sun or to sit in the cold. It's things that you refrain from doing. So now let me ask you a kasha. Well then, now what if somebody's already in the sun and he's uncomfortable? So maybe we should say stay there. Once already you're uncomfortable, so remain uncomfortable. If a fellow is sitting in the shade and it's cold and he's uncomfortable because it's cold, maybe, we won't suggest that he get up and sit in the sun so that he gets not cold. Because after all, if he's already uncomfortable, let him stay uncomfortable. So dumya de melacha, ma melacha lo chalakta ba, afinu lo tachluk ba. So we say, well, it's just like melacha. Just like melacha, it's a low plug. If something is mutter, it's mutter. If it's asur, it's asur. We don't, make distinctions. And therefore also, if we're saying that, sitting in the sun or sitting in the cold is excluded from the Eenuiy of Yom Kippur, well then it's just excluded, like it's not a thing at all. Whether you're sitting in the sun, whether you're not sitting in the sun, don't go sit in the sun. If you're sitting in the sun, you're uncomfortable. You can get out of the sun. Kilo, it's just completely out of the context of the Eenuiy of Yom Kippur. Tanya Idach, we have another brayso that says, Tanus nafsho seichem. You have to afflict your souls. Yochel yeshev b'chamo v'tzina v'yitztair. So maybe it means I should go and sit in the sun or in the cold and become uncomfortable. Tamloma v'chol malacha lo saisu. Therefore it says, don't do any malacha. Ma malacha dar v'shechayav olav b'makom acher. Av inu nefesh shechayav olav b'makom acher. So we say, well, we compare the afflictions of Yom Kippur to malacha. Just like malacha is something that you're not allowed to do in another context. And if you do malacha in that other context, you chayiv kares. What's in that other context? Shabbos, of course, right? I mean, you're not allowed to do malacha on Yom Kippur. And just like malacha is something that also there's another place where you're not allowed to do malacha, which is Shabbos. So then also, well, also when it comes to the affliction, so it has to be something that is also that you're going to be chayiv kares in a different context. Ze pigul v'noser. Well, that's pigul and noser. If you pigul and noser, so you be chayiv kares. So also on Yom Kippur Davka we stay away from pigul and noser that you chayiv kares. Avi pigul v'noser shein b'kares v'lovias atevel shein b'kares. But then the Gemara says, okay, fine, that's all fine and good for pigul and noser. So I know that on Yom Kippur I don't eat pigul and noser. But what about tevel? I'm not chayiv tevel. I'm not chayiv kares if I eat tevel. I'm chayiv misa b'dei shemayim, but I'm not chayiv tevel. I'm not chayiv kares. And therefore maybe I should be allowed, maybe tevel is not part of the afflictions of Yom Kippur. Tamlomer ta'anu v'nisem es nafsho seichem. Riba. Therefore the pasuk says, ta'anu, you should afflict yourselves, v'nisem es nafsho seichem. It says it twice. It actually says it 5 times, I think we're going to see. But riba. Right? So, but I guess it says not just ta'anu, but then it says in a bigger way, v'nisem es nafsho seichem. Although ta'anu is probably also ta'anu es nafsho seichem. So it says ta'anu and then v'nisem es nafsho seichem to include even tevel. So for the Gemara, obvious a tevel shu b'misa, for obvious a nevela she'enu b'misa. But for the Gemara said maybe I'll include tevel, which I'm chayiv misa b'dei shemayim, but maybe I'll exclude nevela, where nevela is a lav. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to eat nevela. You get malchus, but it's not. You don't get misa b'dei shemayim. So we go back to this ribuy of ta'anu v'nisem es nafsho seichem to say even nevela is also tit on Yom Kippur. Obvious nevela shu belav, obvious achulin she'enon belav. So maybe then I'll say, okay, fine. So nevela at least is you're not allowed to eat it. It's a lav if you eat it. So I'll say that if you eat it on Yom Kippur, you're chayiv kares. But chulin, where there's nothing wrong with eating just regular shechted meat, so maybe that won't be a chiyav kares on Yom Kippur. So this inclusion also includes chulin. Well, then maybe I'll include chulin, which I don't have like a particular mitzvah to go and eat chulin in general. Whereas truma though is something different. It's unique in that I have a mitzvah to go and eat truma. Well, not me, but Kohen. So again, relying on this inclusion to say that it even includes truma. Maybe I'll include truma, which doesn't have a chiyuv of, don't leave any over. Maybe I'll exclude kachim, which has this extra facet of not leaving over any kachim. So then we rely on this riba to say, no, it even includes kachim. So basically, you're not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur. And if you do your chayiv kares, and if you want, I'll give you another reason. The pasuk says that anybody, right? What does the pasuk say? That I will, make this soul lost from its nation. So we need dafka an Eenuiy, which is, makes makes your soul less, i.e., refraining from eating and drinking. So that is what's also all types of eating and drinking. In fact, the Gemara, how come we need this other option after we just proved from this reboy that includes all types of eating? How come we need, and also I'll teach you from V'avati es hanefesh ahi. Well, if you want to say that the pasuk of when it says Te'anu v'nisam es nafshosechem is talking about arayis, that you refrain from tashmish hamita on Yom Kippur. So if you want to say that the pasuk of v'nisam es nafshosechem is talking about arayos, from which we learn that tashmish hamita is asur, well then I'll say, okay, fine, forget that. V'avati es hanefesh ahi is talking about Eenuiy that's related to sort of destroying your soul, weakening yourself, i.e., refraining from eating and drinking. And the Rabbi Shmuel Tana was telling this message to Rabbi Shmuel, Nemar kan Eenuiy, Nemar lahalan Eenuiy. It says over here Eenuiy, and it says over there Eenuiy in the context of the mon, as Rashi says, Vayancha vayarivecha, that God afflicted you and starved you. In the context of the mon, Malahalan Eenuiy raivon, Avkan Eenuiy raivon. That just like by the mon, we're talking about an affliction of hunger, so also on Yom Kippur we're talking about an affliction of hunger. V'neilaf mim tainez benosai. But fact the Gemara, 1 second. What about it said Lavan says to Yaakov, he says, Imtanez benosai, if you afflict my daughters, and that's in the context of Tashmish Shamita. So therefore I'll say that, wait, maybe the Eenuiy of Yom Kippur is Davka talking about Tashmish Shamita. To which the Gemara answers, no, better to learn out the Eenuiy of Yom Kippur, which is a public Eenuiy, that everybody needs to afflict themselves, from the Eenuiy of Man, which of course applied to all of Am Yisrael, to the exclusion of a conversation between Lavan and Yaakov, specifically about Rachel and Leah. Why don't we learn it out from the Eenuiy of Mitzrayim, where it says Vayaris Onyenu, that the Eibishter saw our affliction, and that of course applied to the entire nation of Israel at the time. That's talking about staying away from, that was talking about that they weren't having relations between men and women. To which we say, yeah, but we'll learn out Eenuiy b'dei shamayim, Eenuiy from God, whether that's Yom Kippur, whether that's Man, and not from affliction that was imposed by people. When the pasuk says by the Man that God provided the Yidden with man in the desert, in order to afflict you, what's the affliction in the context of the Man? That somebody who has bread in his basket, it's different than somebody who doesn't have bread in his basket. We saw that recently in the context of the fellow who would take out the goat to chuck it off, right? The Sari Mishalech, to chuck it off the cliff. We said that all the people would give him food. We said, why are they giving him food and drink? It's Yom Kippur. Well, we say, because somebody who knows that he has the food, he feels better than somebody who doesn't have any food. And therefore, here also, when it came to the man, there was something very interesting about the man, which is that it fell every day, but every day there was no guarantee that the next day the man was going to fall. I guess at a certain point you probably got used to it, but it's not like, we gave you food for a week and you knew that you were good. Mamish, you lived hand to mouth. You mamish relied upon God raining down man every single day. Like that could be pretty stressful. You don't know, there's no guarantee that the next meal is coming. Let's say God gets upset and he doesn't want to give you any man. It's pretty stressful. So that's what it means, to afflict you, right? So, it's different somebody who has his next meal lined up, who's got bread in his basket. It's very different for somebody who doesn't have bread in his basket. Whereas the other opinion is that, when it came to the man, it may have tasted like anything you wanted, but it didn't look like anything you wanted. And therefore, it's very different. If you could see your food and you taste your food, that's very different than being able to taste it without seeing it. Rav Yosef says Rav Yosef, who of course was blind, says that here's an allusion, a hint, to the fact that blind people eat but don't get satisfied because they can't see what they're eating. Says Abaye, therefore somebody who has a suda, a feast, a meal, he should have it when it's light out so that he could see his food and become satisfied. Amar Abzera Maikra says Abzera wants a pasuk to reference this to Eenuiy Mehalach Nofesh, that it's good to be able to see, I guess, for your soul. Amar Shlakish to Eenuiy Ba'isha Yoser Migufa Shomaise, says Shlakish that seeing a woman and being attracted and having a taiva for a woman is more significant than actually sleeping with that woman. That the taiva is stronger than the act itself. Shnemar to Amar Eenuiy Mehalach Nofesh, that the seeing of the eyes is greater, is more significant than the actual doing. That was the Ayin Daled of Masechta Yoma. Man, there was some real sugyas that we had to work through there at the beginning, right? So the first Amud really continued with the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about is Hatzi shiur, whenever there's a minimum amount for something asur in the Torah. What if you do less than the minimum amount? So we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says that it's asur min hatorah. Rish Lakish says that it's mutar min hatorah, but asur midrabanan. To which we got into this whole shaila about, wait, what about when it comes, right? There's a halacha that when it comes to a shvuas bitoy, that if somebody makes a shvua, a swear, that I will or won't do something, and violates that shvuah, so he has to bring a korban shvuas bitoy. However, there's a halacha that if it's in the context of a mitzvah, that if he swears that he's going to do a mitzvah, or in this case, that he's going to refrain from doing an avera, and violates that shvuah, he's going to be patur from bringing a korban. And the shaila is that Rish Lakish says that when it comes to less than a shiur, you're going to be chayiv to bring a korban shvuas bitoy, which we want to say that therefore it must be mutter midrabanan, because if it's also midrabanan, then you should be patur from bringing a korban shvuas bitoy. To which we ended up saying that no, according to Rish Lakish, Hatzi shiur is mamash also midrabanan, but nonetheless you're going to be chayiv to bring a korban shvuas bitoy, since midoraisa it is mutter. We then got back to the Isra of Achila V'Shtia on Yom Kippur, and we said that it applies to all kinds of food and drink on Yom Kippur. We refrain from eating them. Chebe, that was the Ayin Daled of Masechta Yoma. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Cheers.